Meanwhile, I'm joined this morning by Westminster comms veteran Gawain Towler and political commentator Jonathan Gibson. Welcome to you both. Thank you very much indeed for joining us. I mean, the story of the day, of course, it's on the front pages of all the papers. We talk about Zelensky. Reeves unlocks millions for Kyiv and UK defence. There are a lot of people who are going to be saying, hang on a second, you ran out of money. You've told us that you've run out of money. You've taxed us to the hill. You are killing off businesses because of the rise in national insurance that's just about to come through. You are killing off the economy with a whole range of things. You keep telling us you want to grow it and you're doing everything to kill it off. And by the way, you just found a whole load of more money. So has she done the right thing?
Well, she seems to be claiming that she's going to take it off the interest of the Russian confiscated assets. I don't believe that. She also says it's a loan. Yeah, right. We think we're going to get it paid back. These things, unless we're going to get part of this mineral deal, which would be nice. But to me, it seems it's absurd. The danger of taking this Russian money that's currently frozen in British institutions is that it would be against international law, and we already know this government is an absolute maven for international law. The likelihood is we could take it, we could take it and then get fined and have to pay compensation to Russia for taking it.
But is it? Hang on a second. But is it against the law to take just the assets or the interest? So if you're taking the interest...
Taking the assets is absolutely against the law. Taking the interest probably too, because it's not, it's theirs. And so the danger is we would actually be paying compensation to the Russians to take this money to give to Ukraine, which sounds bats.
Jonathan?
Well, I think under the current Trump administration and current world international order, I'm not sure how much respect international law may or may not have in remains, but I think countries all across Europe are stepping up defence spending because it's absolutely necessary. You know, you're seeing a move away.
It is, but when you have a look at the numbers of what America has been putting into either NATO or elsewhere, it is off the scale. And what Donald Trump has been trying to say, and he may have done it in a somewhat awkward, ugly, maybe impolite way, is basically, you guys are running sophisticated economies that have significant amounts of money. You're going to have to step up. You've got to pay your, quote, fair share. This is something that we keep hearing in our economy when people talk about what we as taxpayers need to, payers need to pay. Oh, you've got to pay your fair share. He's got a point, hasn't he?
No, I agree that Europe needs to step up spending, but in terms of the US contributing, that is also because the US is the current world hegemon. You know, they have the superpower, and if they want to create a particular international order, they have to be the backbone of it. That's what's happened for the last, 50 years, and now Trump is essentially tearing that away and engaging in some sort of colonialism, taking the assets.
I don't think that's fair. It's hardly colonialism. What they've said, just as they did to us in 1939, with Lend-Lease, which we stopped paying in 2006. This isn't new.
The Americans didn't get involved until Pearl
Harbor. Oh, no, they did. They sold us on highly expensive and preferential rates, very second-rate naval kit.
Yeah, but
before they got involved.
They didn't do much.
Well, it was quite so much so we were paying off the debts in 2006.
Yeah, we were.
So it was a lot. It was a lot, and we needed it. We were desperate. Guess what? We've returned away from...
I think you'll rewrite the history slightly. The Americans didn't really get interested in World War II.
No, they weren't interested. They were interested in cash.
And they are today.
As always. We're returning to a world of power politics rather than politics by vacuous tweets. Having seen all those European leaders send out the same tweet, we stand by you forever, what are they actually going to do? It's going to take 10 years to ramp up the military spending to a point where we're an effective defence against Russia. 10 years. In the meantime, what are we going to do?
So
send the Luxembourg army in?
No, absolutely. I mean, firstly, you are seeing a very immediate ramp up in terms of spending.
This is good.
Which has,
at long last.
No, I agree with you. They needed to ramp up spending, but the problem is when you have this world superpower, which has historically always been the backbone of European security, suddenly we're retreating from this international order.
But Trump knows the power of that, doesn't he? Because what Trump is saying, the thing is that I don't think Zelensky read the room when it came to dealing with Trump. That Trump likes to be and needs to be the most important person in the room, and which he is. But he needs to be told that and reinforce that. Whereas other leaders might have a slightly more deferential approach. Trump doesn't.
No, maybe, as in Trump's approach is pretty embarrassing and shocking, in my opinion. His conduct is a disgrace to what we see as like the liberal international order, which has literally now just died with Trump. But what I'm saying is that Trump very much views everything in a completely transactional framework, and actually he's doing is not best for his country or best for the international sphere of the West, because it's meaning that as he's retreating, other powers are moving in.
Flip side of that, though, is that he does understand that, and he does understand the world order, and he does understand his responsibilities. But what he is doing is he's saying, if I am dealing with somebody who is absolutely steadfast in their views and I've got to change their views, I've got to basically blow the thing up until we can rebuild it in a way that he would then support it. Because what he has managed to do, like it or not, he has managed to get Europe to do something that they were not prepared to do before, which is to increase spending. So what did Starmer do? Starmer took a reform policy to say, I'm going to reduce international aid and I'm going to increase UK defence spending to 2.5%, which he was not committed to do. He was not committed to do that at all. And then you've got the Germans and the French and various others who just not committed to increase their defence spending. So by his bombastic and appalling behaviour, he has got them to change their actions.
Sure, but that is in response to an increasingly dangerous world, which is not in the benefit of any of us, you know.
What do we want? We want the war to end, yes?
Well, we don't want just the war to end, no.
You don't want the war to end?
As in, saying that peace should be brought about per se is not a great idea.
Perfect world. Option 1, to get the war to end, Ukraine wins. Best world.
Right.
Yep. Option 2, there's the other option, was Russia wins, not good at all. Or option 3, some form of peace agreement. Those are the 3 ways to end the war. We want the war to end.
Yeah, but the peace
Option
agreement...
1 isn't going to happen with the best will in the world. The Luxembourg military isn't going to force the Russians out of Crimea, nor is ours, nor is the German and Americans. So that's not off the table. We cannot have Russia win. So what is your third option?
To
stop the war, to stop the killing.
So I'm saying with the second option, there's very different scenarios in which a peace can come about. You can come about in a sense where you simply defer, you stop giving money, and you let a peace, which is essentially a loss for Ukraine. I mean,
so that's a Russian win.
That's a
Russian win. We don't
win.
want that.
But that is peace. As in, what do you want? What do you mean by a peace deal?
But hang on a second. Yeah,
that's my point. Yeah, that you can have a peace deal which is terrible for Ukraine, or you can have a peace deal which is better for Ukraine.
And that's arguably what Trump is trying to do. Is he's trying to say, in order to get a peace deal, it means that both sides are going to have to move. So if he's able to go back to Putin and say, look, I got these guys to move, so this is as good as you're going to get. You can either take it or leave it. And by the way, we'll free up all these various things because he's got the money. So maybe that's
importantly the mineral deal, which was said during that interview before we saw the 10 minutes at the end. The mineral deal that he was proposing, which was to 50-50, which is a lot better than most international mineral deals, by the way, for the host country. A 50-50 mineral deal would mean that America had security interests in Ukraine. It had economic interest in Ukraine. He was actually giving security
Well, what
guarantees.
he was doing is that he was giving a reason for him to have, whether it's troops on the ground or money, because then, you know, they are involved. But then, of course, I mean, you talk about the world. I mean, the world has frankly always been a very dangerous place, and it continues to be. It's just that perhaps our focus is there more because we've seen what's been happening in the Middle East. We've been seeing what's happening but China has been, you know, buying up huge tracts of land and mineral deposits and everything else for the last 30 years. It's just that we couldn't be bothered to look at it.
And in response, Trump has done very irrational policies from, for example, pulling the CHIPS Act, which is an America First policy, withdrawing from international institutions, which has allowed China to in a much greater sense, capture them. And actually, this deal with Ukraine, you know, whilst in the short term he may gain access to some minerals, a lot of the tariffs and problems around trade are going to lead to problems around the semiconductor production.
Do you think, though, that when Trump decided to talk about, I don't know, creating a Riviera resort in Gaza, was he basically sort of destructing, if you like, this idea, just almost saying to people, it is such a mess that somebody is going to have to do something. All you countries around, you won't recognise Palestinian people, you won't recognise the area, you won't stop this thing on your own. So I'm going to come in and do it and stop it in order to get them to move, to say, we don't want that, so maybe we are going to have to do it ourselves?
I fully believe that he was just completely trolling, just trying to get a reaction. I don't think there was any logic that I could see in posting that awfully stupid video. I just think he was trying to get, you know, a laugh at the ridiculousness of it. I don't know if you guys have a different take.
It was absurd.
It was absolutely absurd.
I think we do have to go back and look, touching on the rest of the world other than the Ukraine thing. Trump's big issue is China, absolutely. It was interesting. One of the first acts he took on becoming president, after inauguration, was blocking the 50, 60 supertankers were taking Russian oil to other parts of the world. That was the first act. That's the sort of thing you should be doing. The European Union has been buying more gas and power from Russia than it's been giving in aid to Ukraine. The hypocrisy of this wonderful liberal order is diabolical. It is the wonderful liberal order that's allowed the Iranians to have enough depleted uranium to build nuclear weapons. Not good for the world.
Let's move on. So, Labour must target deprived areas or lose out to reform, says former minister, is one of the stories in the papers today. I mean, I'm sort of fascinated by not only the polls that yesterday, another poll indicating that reform had overtaken now Labour in terms of their success or otherwise. I mean, behind closed doors, I mean, obviously when you speak to any Labour supporter, they'll say, well, it's just a temporary blip and it'll be fine and it always happens. Behind closed doors, people must be breaking it, that we've got real issues.
Yeah, you absolutely do have real issues, and I think this article touches on a lot of truth in which people are feeling increasingly left behind in the job market. You know, inequality is skyrocketing. There's less opportunities. You know, I was on talking before about this, about the lost generation, which there's studies about today where young men aged 18 to 24 in particular are really struggling to get a job, to find opportunity. And the combination of this kind of winner-takes-all economic systems where areas are simply just left behind, combined with the kind of historical expectations that men should go out in the workplace and, you know, earn some money and be sort of a protector role, which again is starting to change, is leading to these really bad scenarios in which, you know, young men are just sitting at home playing video games to get that dopamine hit and feeling really alienated from society, and actually.
But is that a failure of society, a failure of schools, a failure of the political class?
It's a combination. It's everything.
Everything.
I mean, there's
so
really
everything is wrong. But then, okay, fine. But then on the other hand, I mean, Labour must target deprived areas. It's going to take more than, you know, arguably a generation to deal with the problems that we've got. And also, I think, you know, there are a lot of areas around the country which have been targeted with whether it's hotels that fill with asylum seekers or all sorts of other issues or social problems, combined with high streets up and down you know, the land, which are being, you know, plagued by huge amounts of either rough sleeping or theft and shoplifting, that Labour has got a major problem. If they have just won the election to the extent that they did, with the number of seats that they have off a relatively small base, and they cannot maintain, you know, that level of support, we could see a one-term parliament, couldn't we?
Well, looking at what you initially started, yes, the fact is they may dismiss the reform challenge, but the reality is they're not dismissing it internally. However, read the report, read the thing in the Observer today that we're talking about, Hilary Alexandra's report. She talks about potholes, she talks about things of this sort. She doesn't mention migration and the mass migration that has had a big impact. She doesn't mention the demonisation of the white working class by the establishment and the elite. And she doesn't mention... we talk about increasing the military. Now, who do they want to go and fight? The people they've told are far right wing. These are the people they're going to want to join the army. And they hold them in contempt, they hold their culture in contempt, they hold their history in contempt, and they regard them as second-class citizens in their own land. So no surprise, they look towards Farage and Reform as a voice to speak for them.
Do you agree with that assessment?
I think there's some element of culture. I don't definitely agree as strongly, but I think actually economics is kind of what has been neglected in some of these arguments, where these areas are just rural, are just run down. You know, globalization and deindustrialization has just really hit these areas, and as a result, they're thinking, you know, what is it I'm fighting for? I can't find a job. I don't have any opportunities. There's nothing going on in my town, and essentially, I'm feeling incredibly left behind as urban areas and kind of the political establishment.
40% said they wouldn't fight for the country, and yet we're going to need to bump up the military. We're in a real trouble here.
No, I agree.
If you denigrate everything about the country, if, as you say, everything is rubbish, or as Reform say, Britain is broken, and so there's some sort of agreement there, then how do we turn that around? And you were right, it's all sorts of levels. It's both educational, but it's also, it's broader than that. The commitment to this sort of liberal international order, free trade, keep the prices down, keep wages down by importing 1 million people in 1 year, that has that impact. But Jonathan, you can't talk about low wages without noticing that.
How do Labour go about fixing this? Because if they start talking about fixing potholes and various other things, and they sort of like distract, nothing to see here, they're not going to.
Okay. So in my opinion, there's two core ways, or there's more than two ways, but if we put this in broad categorizations, there's two ways. So the first is cultural, people feeling alienated from this national community, and I think kind of, and maybe this is where we'd have some agreement, is boosting national identifying symbols, you know, maybe British flags on the national anthem in schools, or, you know, like some more pride in our identity is one way. History.
But they have
an honest
but
history.
in reality, they have to stop rewriting history. You've got to stop apologising for everything that we've ever done.
I'm not talking about rewriting history. I'm talking...
No, but they have to stop that happening.
On the same day, we have other things where the cancel culture has torn out our heroes, replaced our... In House of Commons this week, we're taking down the paintings of Drake and Nelson and Wellington and putting Yvette Cooper up.
I don't think...
I mean, really?
I honestly don't think...
How can you say you like the country and its history when you tear it down?
Well, again, it depends. Like, these are people who are... If you're putting up statues of anyone, you can't judge historical figures by the morals of our time.
It's not a question of putting statues up, it's a question of taking them down.
I think they should be in museums, but that's a whole different debate.
That's hidden in a museum. They should be in public display. They should be in the public wheel.
No, but I don't...
They should be seen,
okay,
they should be taught, they should be
loved. We can talk about statues and whether they should be in the public domain. I think that you have historical figures that have the morals of their time, and they themselves can't be held to account necessarily in the same way that someone...
we agree.
No, but what I'm saying is that you put someone with the historical values of their time, which are abhorrent for our time in some senses, and you make them a national symbol. Is that the sort of symbol and the values that I want to see embodied in the centre of Britain? Some values which necessarily really don't align. You know, you have someone who's virulently...
Winston Churchill. Should he have statues and...
Again, it all depends on the context. I think if you have proper education around both, you know, the good and amazing work he did and also some of the really horrendous things that he did and supported, then I think that's broadly fine. Or if you have some acknowledgement of that in a plaque next to it or something, that's fine. But again,
so we have to second-guess everything.
We have to second-guess everything. We reevaluate everything all the time.
Hold the wokerati. Oh my God!
Terrible.
I just need a little lie down to recover from the wokerati, and then we will have some more chit-chat about trying to justify why we shouldn't have Winston Churchill, frankly, everywhere, which we should. Anyway, that's another story. We will do that in just a moment here on Talk.
They have looked at us. They do know we have problems. The shine has come off, and actually a bit like a sort of big cousin who's a bit more successful, who worries about the sort of, you know, wider family at large and wants them to be okay, who sort of has a pastoral, patriarchal role to play in the greater family. That's what America's doing now. It's looking over to Europe, it's looking over to the UK and saying, look, you're one of us. We're kind of all part of the same civilizational development that's been facing a crisis. Get your act together.
across the UK. On DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
27 minutes past 8 o'clock is the time. It's me, James Banks, with you till 10 here on Talk, where we are going through the big stories in our head-to-head with Gawain Taylor and Jonathan Gibson. We got into a bit of a row just a moment ago about it just all got a bit woke town. I genuinely don't understand people who think that we should judge with today's values on people who were acting in the past, and particularly when, I mean, through teaching and various different other aspects, I think, of course, it's helpful to understand how society has changed. But when people want to take down statues, when they want to start putting up explanatory, things, and you go in around natural trust thing, and then say, oh, this could be, challenging, or this could be troubling to you, or this could be distressing, or whatever, it's just like, oh, shut up. I mean, really? I mean, Jonathan, do we really need all that sort of like trigger warnings? It's like, so Sky, trigger warning? No, I don't need a trigger warning.
I'm not saying you need a trigger warning in front of any of this. What I'm saying is fundamentally I see statues as something, the values that society embodies, right?
Yes.
If that's what it is, okay? Or did, fine. You can never have, I can't think of a single person throughout the whole of human history, right, that at their context and time would have had values that we would embody as a society today, in totality. Because,
so
as you said, values... That's the point.
Why do we even try? Why do we need little notes?
So
we can work that out for ourselves.
No, but that's my point.
Okay,
you can't have a statue of a person and take their whole policy and everything about them.
So you go up to Margaret Thatcher's statue, and then presumably it was her social policies that people might disagree with. So, for example, Section 28, various other things that were argued for.
The whole lot.
Are you not a Thatcher fan?
Personally, I'm not a big fan of Thatcher. No, I think it was one of, and this is connected to some of the stuff that we were talking about. Maybe we don't disagree entirely on this around globalization. She was the one that really accelerated globalization and transitioned into this neoliberal consensus which we've had for the last 50 years,
fantastic.
where you've had completely open market. What do you mean fantastic? You were just telling me about how bad immigration was a minute ago.
Yes, it is.
That is globalization.
But you can have open market. You can have free trade without free immigration.
Exactly.
Sure, but then you just have factories moving abroad, right? Which is what's happened, and this is why these towns and these
well, that's as much because of our daft net zero policies as anything else.
No, I don't
think so. Up the price of energy, so it's no longer economic to do business.
That was way before net zero. This was all way before net zero.
The net zero stuff's been coming in for quite a long time.
No, with respect, like my family are from Birmingham. I've seen the effect that the deindustrialisation has happened.
But that was because of levels of union control, because of the impact of the impact of the 4-day week and the oil crisis in the early 70s. There was a whole bunch of reasons. The sclerosis of socialist control of our industries meant that we built the Morris Ital. Now, you've probably never seen the Morris Ital, but it is truly the worst car in history, designed by a socialist committee and deservedly, sadly,
it's one of the worst cars. I think that there are other issues with the British car industry.
Okay,
but I think here's the issue that I have with that kind of argument, which is if you are...
Sorry.
Have you given up smoking? Or
not entirely, but...
Right, well, I would advocate it. I mean, come on. I mean,
giving in to the globalists, the capitalists, show smoking, the tobacco industry, absolutely disgusting. You should see the money they put behind it, They pay young people money to write articles in favour of lobbying against, like, revoking smoking stuff, like changing policy. They'll offer hundreds of pounds in order for me to support,
But hang on, wasn't it Philip Morris or was it BAT Industries who this week said that we want to stop smoking?
Yeah, but there's been a backlash to it, and they're paying lots of young people lots of money in order to write articles against that, and they're moving away from it. Yeah,
anyway,
huge amount.
But the woke-tastic response, if you like, to some of this, an inability to understand the connection between immigration or uncontrolled immigration, wages, housing, call on our society and various other things. And then also this discussion about redistribution of wealth and all these sorts of things. I mean, we do have a very redistributionist tax system already. I mean, does it need to be more redistributionist?
No, we don't, because, we tax working people pretty heavily, right? We have high national insurance, and maybe I'll agree with you there. The problem is the people advocating for the reduction in taxes are saying that because they want reduction in taxes for everyone, but primarily themselves, which are the super rich who should be paying more taxes.
Yeah, but the thing is that, here's the point about
COVID.
But here's the point about the super rich is that because we don't have a globalist tax situation and
a single world tax,
a single world tax,
and
because the more money you have, the more mobile you are. then you will get, if you make your tax system inappropriate for them, in the way that we've seen with non-doms, if you make it so that they might as well just go somewhere else, they will take their money and they will go elsewhere. So if they do that, then you get a bigger percentage of nothing. And this is the point, is that then what you do is you end up taxing your working people even more and stopping them moving up and having that opportunity to make money. You
to make
just
up
have
the
to,
people
you have
you've
to take
exported.
away the green
So
idea.
can I respond to that argument in terms of people moving abroad? Okay, so there's a couple of things. The first is most of their wealth is not in the form of income. Most of it is in the form of assets, right?
Sure.
And it's much harder, as we've seen with Roman Abramovich. You can't just pack up Chelsea Football Club and carry it on your back and take it with you to, wherever else you're going to avoid paying tax. That just doesn't work.
So
and
he
you've
sold
seen
it
the
and he took the
ability
money.
to...
Yeah.
Sorry?
So he sold it and he took the money.
No, but again, he can't. You can't simply withdraw assets, which is where he's making his money from. And that frees up assets for other individuals in the UK or the government to actually make money and earn money through having those assets,
Yes, but you can only do those things if you have coordinated action and response. And the thing is that if
that's what you
but,
need.
But here we are.
A single global government.
We're not a single global government.
Yeah,
I'm
but
talking
we
about you
live in
can
a
do it
world.
British
We live in
with
a world.
assets.
We live in a world which
Yeah.
has encouraged certain companies to undercut others. And if you have a look at, for example, the likes of Amazon or anything else, so we've killed off our high street. And one of the stories today about
M&S.
WH Smith
Sorry, you're right,
disappearing off the high street. Part of the impact of those companies is that we are no longer going to see the sorts of shops that we had, and it's because we don't have the tax system which is applied in the same way to an online retailer as to a physical retailer.
But there's lots of research on this. Companies care much more than just tax systems. They care about how well educated and skilled up the workforce is in the area, how good the transportation is in the area, health systems which can prevent their workers from going really ill and all that kind of stuff, which we've been falling behind on. And
why have we fallen behind?
Because I would say because you've had this kind of neoliberal consensus for the last 30 years where you haven't invested in public services, you haven't invested in infrastructure.
That is a very lazy way.
We have invested.
That is a very lazy way. Hang on a second. This is a very lazy way of discussing something where you are not dealing with the elephant in the room, which is if you are going to allocate money to central resources like hospitals and schools and infrastructure and all that sort of thing, and if you are going to budget based on one population size and you are not going to recognise a change in population, so if you want to have immigration, fine, have it, but you must make the change to your allocation of assets to your core services. We have not had that. Conservatives and Labour have ignored the changes in population and the advice that they've been given. They've been looking at historic data, which means that they are not putting enough into our services. Full stop. So stop using the words neoliberal. It is about numbers of people, money and economics, and they have not explained the connection between...
They have had to do that ever since 1997 with the E8 enlargement, the European enlargement. They have had to do that because they've had to continue lying to the population to get elected and basically denying the vast numbers of people arriving. And so therefore, do you remember, it was 13,000 were going to come and it was 250,000 that did. And people were saying that's not true, but they'd lied and lied, so they couldn't make the plans for a future population. Because if they did so, they'd have had to admit
because that
to
is
what
because
they
it
were
was
doing.
very convenient to them to keep down wages.
But they could not make the plans you're talking about.
By importing the labour
which
that
is good for businesses, again, and not good for...
It can be.
Yeah, but again, you can't have your cake and eat it. You can't say it's all about economic growth from these businesses and say then we need to reduce immigration. But also, if we focus in particular areas, for example, in the healthcare sector, a lot of this is propped up by foreign, by immigrants who have come in to serve the workforce in the NHS, and without it, our healthcare system would collapse.
But there are other reasons for that, because we stopped training our own. We stopped the nurses' bursary, 50,000 a year. Stopped getting the nurses' bursary. The following year, we needed 50,000 imported nurses.
So that's been a change to our model, as in, like, Australia have a similar way, because it is very expensive to train doctors. I'm not saying it's necessarily the entirely right approach to have neglected the service.
So let me go back to then. Labour having to target deprived areas or losing out to reform or whatever else. I mean, one of the things that Angela Rayner has promised is 1.5 million homes to be built between now and the end of this Parliament. Is there any chance that she's going to achieve that?
Look, it's really hard to build homes. We saw with the HS2 the problems, that kind of the NIMBYs, the not in my backyard people who don't want things going through their constituency and thereby force building to go underground or force it to be really difficult.
But you know why NIMBYs exist?
Because they don't like a view of a train station, they don't like a view of like a house which reduces their property. I'm sorry, but when there's millions of people who can't get a home or can't have a job, or in my generation, I really don't have much sympathy.
Well, I know they don't, but you see, I think that's partly because of a lack of understanding of the planning process and what it's there to do, but also in terms of what value means, and that problem can be resolved. And one of the reasons that there were so many objections to whether it's HS2 or going underground or anything else is that we as a society and a nation have not applied the rules as we should do for compulsory purchase. So if you pay or compensate people properly for a development or something that happens, you will find that NIMBYism will virtually disappear. But when you have, for example, people are seeing hundreds of houses bolted onto their town or village, but they're not seeing the investment in the roads that get them in and out. They're not seeing the investment in the local schools that get them in and out. And they have this, applicable, affordable housing, and then you're socially engineering various different areas. You're changing the nature of population, and so you're giving absolutely no consideration to the people who live there. And so it's not surprising that people are going to use the laws and the regulations to say no, because they don't want the change. They're not going to be compensated. They are paying for it,
and they quite like where they're at.
And they quite like where they're at. That if you bought a house with a view, you don't want to see the view go.
This aligns with my perspective in terms of the transportation, that we haven't raised the money through taxation that we need to in order to fund infrastructure development. And I'm completely with you on that. We need to do better. We need to develop transport and links, etc. However, yes, they like a view. Okay, that is the key argument that a lot of them are giving. Let me give you
not. It's a lot more than that. That is the froth argument that is used against them. There's a lot more to it.
But it's a
they
froth
like
argument.
the fact that they can't find a GP. They can't. Their children can't go to local school.
But how does that affect again someone like building a house in the area?
Because if you're building 500 in a village of 400, then it has a massive impact.
But it's never in a village of 400. 2% of the UK is urbanised. A tiny proportion.
What?
2%.
Yes, but the vast population
is urbanised.
That falls under the 76% of statistics are made up.
It's
I
not.
think you'll find it's about 8.5%.
Research. Just you're a like. I hope disinformation doesn't occur on this program. I'm sure it doesn't. So if you don't believe me, you can look it up.
I will. Well,
yes, but we're not talking about moving people onto the Suffolk Glen.
No, we don't need people. We don't need that 2%. The fact that only 2% means you don't need to.
No, I do.
Means you don't need to. But my point is, you can build housing in order for people to live.
What are you saying? I thought it was 8.5 or 9% of the UK landmass is built on.
No, 2%.
No, that's not true.
Well, look up. We can research. You saying you're? I'm not sure.
This is where.
Look up.
This is where. I'm afraid somebody who goes off and discusses evidence-based stuff is just nonsense.
Evidence-based stuff is nonsense. So then, what are we believing if there's no evidence?
You see, this is the thing: is that when you start using a statistic and then bring it forward as a fact when it isn't. You see, this is very dangerous because then you remove all the discussions about anything that makes any sense. But when it comes to dealing with these problems, I think one of the things that I don't think we have enough discussion about in our society is when Angela Rayner talks about these things, she doesn't actually talk about the barriers. NIMBY is part of the reason, but there are actually enough planning permissions already valid in this country to build all the homes that we need. The difficulty that you've got is the tax system doesn't want and doesn't encourage developers and builders to take the risk. We don't have enough people to do the work that needs to be done if you were to build it. We haven't made the infrastructure changes to deal with all that, and as a result of it, it means that the whole process is broken, combined with the fact that the financing model, because development finance is really expensive. If you are a speculative developer, getting hold of finance is very, very expensive. So if the government really wanted to short-circuit that, they would provide either guaranteed loans for developers, and they would probably change the profit and taxation.
But there's also part of this is the impact of legal changes on the private rental sector and people leaving the private rental sector.
Yeah, because they've made it even more difficult to rent.
Underpinning all these problems is mass migration. And if we don't stop that, it becomes a Ponzi scheme. We have to bring in people to build the houses, and then we have to bring in more people to build the houses for the people we've brought in to build the houses, and so on and so forth. It has to stop.
Is there one area of agreement which is that Angela Rayner is not going to get her £1.5 million?
I don't know. I think it is unlikely.
Unlikely.
My grandma, last month, tried to get a tree removed from her garden. Just in the context of planning permission, she had to go to the council of the trees for the local council.
Oh yeah, no, I have to. Yes.
It's like the most ridiculous, bureaucratic, long-winded process.
But then on the other hand,
insane.
if you don't have protection for trees, then you end up with the stupid councils who just decided because of the cost of looking after them, they just lopped loads of trees.
Plymouth being the case in point.
Correct. So you have to have these tree pieces of legislation.
At the moment, you have fields with a singular tree in the middle, and as a result, you can't build anything on the field. This is where we're kind of switching, is in I'm becoming the more free market person on supply side policies, and you're kind of suddenly changing.
Are you the person who went and chopped that lovely sycamore?
Yeah, the one down the.
I'm sorry, the one outside. Yeah, it's gone. I'm building a house myself.
Yeah, exactly. But you see, that's
them.
the point. Is that but there are always these two sides to these arguments. Anyway, we will come back and have some more chat in just a moment here on Talk.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
So we've been having a bit of a row about how much the UK is built on, and this is why I'm always very conscious that one needs to be very careful about statistics, because you'll find that people will pick the statistic that suits them in order to push their particular narrative. Jonathan, over to you. Mm-hmm. So you were saying that 2% of the UK is built on. If you take the very narrow definition of what has like an actual building on it, as opposed to what is built, then of course you might come up with that low statistic. But when you start to add in the roads and the rails and the infrastructure and the stuff around and the car parks and all these things, then you do end up with a figure about well, it's actually more than that, because that's just including wider definition. But when you actually get it, it is about 9 or 10% of the UK is built on.
Okay, so say we even take that, which I think it's 5.9% from what I read, in terms of if you include...
But it was 2% a moment ago.
Yeah, that's I was talking about the narrow definition. If you want to include all this other stuff, we're talking specifically about housing. But this is why you have to be very
careful about what you're talking about.
I am being careful. No, I'm talking about a narrow definition, which is completely justified based on the context of the conversation. Even if it's 10%, 90%, it doesn't change the scope of my argument. There's still lots of room to be built on. And, Ivan can go and travel, and we can travel around the UK and see that there's large spaces of land that just haven't been built on or developed.
There are enough planning permissions permissions to build all the houses we need.
But it's so difficult to get planning permission.
No. Why do you need more planning permission when you've already got planning permission? Enough planning permission. You could build 2.5 million houses with all the permissions which are there.
Clearly not, because it's unbelievably difficult to build a house.
Why is it difficult?
So it's not the planning permission, you need other things.
So why is it difficult to build the house?
No, because because of NIMBYs, right? That's the first reason.
They've got permission.
The permission exists.
The permission's there.
No, because they take it to court. It takes 10 years to get through, and by that time it doesn't happen.
Excuse me. The permissions are there. So if the permission is there, why are houses not being built?
No, again, the permissions are not there.
They are.
They're not.
No. They genuinely are.
It's the investment.
because
It's the
you can
money.
block.
It's all the rest of it that's required.
there's plenty of money.
You are on very, very thin ice.
I'm not on thin ice whatsoever.
Because you're dealing with somebody who does understand the real estate industry and has done a lot of investigation into how many
I've looked into housing as well, because again, it's obviously
and
a very
your qualification
profitable
is.
thing. What do you mean? It's not what do you believe in qualifications? If so, I think you should.
No. So I'm trying to explain to you. I'm trying to explain that there are enough permissions, and if you can, sorry, and you don't be careful of your microphone. Which means don't go up and start rushing around. Yeah, there we go. Keep the hands down. So if we are discussing planning permissions and we're talking about the fact that there aren't enough houses, what I'm telling you is that there are plenty of planning permissions there. And that is not the reason that houses are not being built. So if you don't look at, and this is exactly my point, if you don't look at the financing, the tax, the workers, the supply, the infrastructure, all of those things, there is no chance that 1.5 million houses are going to be built.
No, the supply is in critical, as in there's much more demand than supply. So you would think it'd be an incredibly profitable thing to do, to build and develop a house.
Then why isn't it?
But it's not, because if you enforce
the
developer to put in too much of a percentage of affordable housing,
too much of a percentage of affordable, they'd be making a killing off of it.
No, they don't, because you don't understand basic economics then. You don't make a profit off it.
You will be making
affordable housing.
No, because again, what do you mean by affordable housing? Like class affordable housing to me, none of it is affordable at the moment. If you go back and you take about the proportion of people spending,
if none of it was affordable, then they wouldn't be able to sell it.
It's not affordable.
To who?
That's the point. To most people. Most people can't
that's
buy a
not
house.
True. Most people can buy a house. The difficulty that we've got is that we've got a younger generation for whom it is absolutely unaffordable. And again, if we're not looking at the specifics as to... Yeah, but there's a huge population where if you take away the value from them, then you are creating a further problem within the housing market. So if you want to get the housing market functioning, if you want to get these things here, if you want to get things working, then you need to have a wider context, which is why, for example, your focus on that narrow piece of data extrapolates and explains the problem that we have, which is you're not going to have a solution to the housing problem unless you take into account immigration, unless you take into account tax, unless you take into account social differences, and also the unintended consequences of the things that you want.
And there's also the regulatory burden, which is significant in house building. There is also the net zero argument. Building a house is highly energy. It costs a great deal in energy, and that mitigates against other things. So the regulations are brought in to underpin the net zero argument, which makes it even more expensive. So if you try and restore, say, town centres upstairs above the empty shops, there's masses of empty flats, but the cost of refurbishing them to a point where they can be reused is so great because of these requirements.
I think we, in the same way that instead of looking at what we have, we could do an awful lot of provision of supply or otherwise if there were either changes in regulation or again, using tax incentives. One thing I do need to ask you about, though. Undergraduates at university, undergraduates at Cardiff University have also been warned to avoid using a whole range of words. So, for example, they've been told not to say kill two birds with one stone, or a piece of cake, or to use a word like crazy when something is crazy, because apparently they are very British English and won't be understood by other cultures. This is guidance issued by an EDI, as in Equality, Diversity and Inclusion awareness module, which is mandatory for first-year students. Mandatory. Should we have these things? I mean, do we need to be careful of language such as things like killing two birds with one stone?
No, some of it obviously seems ridiculous. I think it doesn't need to be taught that if you have a friend from another country, they might not understand your British phrase. That's not the sort of thing that necessarily needs to be taught on the curriculum. There were a couple of others which I do think makes more sense. Things like, man up, or like don't, cry like a girl. I think that does. I try generally not to use it. I think it does enforce harmful prejudices and stereotypes.
I've never really used either of those phrases.
Clearly, you guys are much more woke than me.
No, it's just,
have you manned up? I mean, have you told people to man up before?
As in, when I was growing up, I used to hear that all the time.
Did you?
Oh yeah. Oh, man up, cry like a girl, stop being such a girl. Like all gendered stuff.
When I was abroad, I liked learning local idiom. The idea that we can't lose local idioms such as piece of cake because people in this country whose language is English in their first language, surely they should be enjoying.
Well, next we're going to see saying it's a piece of cake is bad because it encourages people to eat too much. But there we go. So maybe we can end then on just a little bit of agreement that maybe we just need to check. I mean, we could save a whole load of money just by bidding this manual. That's a good idea. Bidding the
it's
model.
Compulsory. They all have to do it.
Fire the people who did this. Get rid of this Cardiff EDI model. Get rid of them.
In the last month, they've fired 400 academics from Cardiff University, but they are introducing this.
And there we go. Last word to you, Jonathan.
It's international students that are funding this stuff, funding our university, so, probably making money off of it, to be honest.
So we could kill two birds with one stone. We're just getting rid of all of them and getting rid of this nonsense.
Like
and then we'd all be absolutely fine. See,
Indeed.
Jonathan, he's got radical views. Jonathan Gibson and Indigo Town. Thank you very much indeed for joining us here on Talk, where